Jimmy Neutron Attack of the Twonkies, the final game in the Jimmy Neutron GameCube / PS2 trilogy, and the only one I have any kind of attachment to. I played through this one a couple times when I was little, and I remember having a pretty good time with it. So that being said, I can't go into this one blind like I did the previous two games, but I'm gonna try to keep the structure of the video the same to make watching all three Jimmy videos a consistent experience. If you missed any of the previous videos, I do recommend you give them a watch before watching this one. Just note, they're a little bit old. A video on this game came out in late 2018, and this one came out about a year ago, so not my best work, they're a little bit dated, but my thoughts on these games remain the same. To sum up my experience with the Jimmy Neutron game so far, I played Boy Genius, hated it, thought I'd never play a game worse, then Jet Fusion happened. I had a decent amount of fun at first, but the game slowly wore my patience. By the end of my experience with it, I labeled it the worst game I had ever played. Needless to say, if I had no prior knowledge of Attack of the Twonkies, I'd be going in with the lowest expectations possible, but that's not the case. I'll keep them low, but I am certain this game won't be as bad as the other two. Okay, enough contextualizing, let's boot up the game. First impressions are a big deal in video games, and the first impression most games have on players are with the title screen. It's not super important, but it sets the stage for the experience to build off of, and the first two Jimmy Neutron games didn't do much of anything. Game logo, black background, no music. I'm clocking out early, see ya. Attack of the Twonkies, on the other hand, the Jimmy Neutron theme roaring with these aerial shots of Retroville sets up an energetic and exciting tone for the experience to come, which is perfect. When you start a new game, it opens with a cutscene of a normal day at school for Jimmy. He shows off an invention, is picked on by Sydney, and the principal announces a talent show. Pretty standard stuff. It doesn't set up much plot and is basically only there to entertain you, and it does that really well. The writing feels right out of the show, and there's some pretty funny moments. The only important thing Jimmy reveals is that he plans to visit Twonkus 3 when it comes into orbit later that day, and the next cutscene picks right up in his lab as he prepares to take off. The lab serves as the game's tutorial, and this is one of the slowest tutorials I've had to play through, but it's not all bad. The lab itself looks just like you'd expect it to, and there's tons of cool things you can interact with. It's so much better than Jimmy's lab in the first game. The problem is how much the game explains to you. Despite there being a giant Y button floating over things you can interact with, they find the need to explain it. And you can't make any of the text move faster. You're stuck slowly listening to the whole explanation for everything.
You will need to jump on different things throughout the game. If you press the jump button once, you will do a normal jump. Press it a second time when you are in the air and you will do a double jump. Jump now to reach the pickup.
Come on. Despite the tutorial dragging, the moveset Jimmy has this time around is solid, and at the forefront of it, a double jump. Finally, neither previous Jimmy Neutron game had one, and as a result, the platforming was way more annoying and difficult than it had to be, so this is a huge addition. And with that, you've got easy access to all your inventions with the D-pad and hypercube, a simple action button for using inventions, and a very functional camera. You get full control over it, and the L button even recenters it, which is great. The only other thing worth mentioning is the inventor face, which the game believes is a way better pun than it actually is. Here you can make a whole slew of different things with the items you find, and this whole system is actually really cool. A lot of these inventions are required to progress, but it's still satisfying to find enough things to make something new, and the Brain Blast sequence from the show is a nice touch. Jet Fusion tried something similar, and it wasn't that bad, but here they implemented it much better. There, you search for all the items in the entire level, and once you found them all, the game automatically made the invention for you. Here you have to actively go into this inventor face and make it yourself, which is way more interactive, and as dumb as it may sound, makes you feel more like your Jimmy Neutron. There's 3 classifications for the inventions: gizmos, inventions, and super inventions. Gizmos are usually optional and provide some wacky effects, which are pretty fun to play around with here and there, and the inventions and super inventions are necessary for progression. But you'll have no problem finding everything you're required to. They made those things way more obvious and tucked away the optional stuff. After teaching Jimmy's moveset, the tutorial introduces you to using Goddard to solve puzzles. Initially, you can only make him sit on things and play dead, but other abilities are unlocked later on. He's not used a whole lot, but it's cool that they implemented him in some gameplay, not just for vehicle sections like the previous two games. Anyways, after you find all the super invention items and create Jimmy's rocket, you head outside and take off for Twonkus 3. It's just too bad I couldn't help Carl
sniff animals.
This leads to a crummy shooting section in the ship, but I won't complain about it too much. It lasts like 30 seconds. I guess Jimmy needs some more fuel before going to the actual comet though, so he stops at a space station to loot it? Yeah, he literally commits theft. For some reason, he decides to turn off the station's defense systems too, which causes it to get bombarded with meteors. So not only is he taking the station's fuel, but he's literally causing the thing to get destroyed. What a guy. After another subpar flying section, he lands on Twonkus 3, plays some music from his rocket so he can find it again, and heads into a cave on the asteroid. Inside you get a couple upgrades for Goddard, including excavation that allows him to dig up these colored minerals, and fetch, which has you throw something over a wall and Goddard bash through it. You also invent some stuff, most notably the refractal ray, a gun. You're in and out of this cave pretty pretty quickly, and once you leave, this giant dude is bashing on your rocket, which leads to the game's first boss. It's not a fight or anything, you just run to your ship and avoid giant rocks he's sending at you. Just gotta get there before he completely destroys it, which I can do in my sleep. After narrowly escaping, it cuts to the next day at school, where Jimmy and the gang discover a tiny Twonkie that Jimmy brought to school by mistake. It's harmless when they find it, but once Sheen turns up the radio and starts jamming out, the Twonkie goes through a metamorphosis and gets bigger and much more fierce looking. They realize the music causes the creature to evolve, but can't do much about it because it starts chasing them. Carl and Sheen escape, but Jimmy trips, which allows the Twonkie to throw a desk at the door to block him in. The cutscene here sets up this really stressful situation, like, oh Jimmy's trapped with this violent monster, but once it cuts to gameplay, this dude's just vibing. I guess Jimmy can't move a desk though, so you have to invent a shrink ray and shrink yourself to exit the room. When you leave, you find an upgrade for Goddard that lets him sniff around and find items in lockers, which is handy but takes way too long. The lockers with items in them all conveniently have these white markings on them, so I know which one he's going to find, but sometimes he'll search for like 30 seconds. Dude, it's right there. And I haven't mentioned this yet, as it gets more and more annoying as you play, but every time Jimmy finds an item, everything around him freezes entirely, he holds it, does the celebration thing, and shows it off, which is just a glowing color that represents whether it's a gizmo, invention, or super invention piece. This in itself isn't that bad, but it happens way too often. The sequence takes like 5 seconds and he repeats the same couple lines every single time, which is so annoying. Anyways, Jimmy heads into the library where Butch is being a dick and not letting him go to the first floor and use the computer, so I kid you not, he starts whipping books at his head until he eventually runs off. Jimmy has no chill. He then uses the library computer to find the book he was looking for, and turns out it's up top. Now hear me out, maybe, just maybe if you knew your Dewey Decimal System just a little bit better, we could have avoided a literal assault. The book confirms his theory about sound waves affecting them, and that's about it. You leave, find some more items, invent the Retro Wrench V3, and potentially even more useful, the Speed Sneakers. There's no run button, but if you equip these, you get super speed for a decent amount of time, and the music even changes to a Benny Hill inspired track. It's awesome, one of the most useful gizmos in the entire game for sure. As he continues through the school, he saves some of his classmates from blue Twonkies and gets scolded by the principal, who announces there's a school emergency! Oh, brother. Jimmy then leaves the school and heads home to figure out how to stop the attack of the Twonkies.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
Once he gets there, you explore the house looking for invention items, and it's really freaking cool to be able to explore this iconic estate. They got most of the details dead on. When you find everything, Jimmy invents the Poltergeist 3000, the VDR, which can be used to capture the Twonkies. When it's equipped, you hold B to attach to a Twonkie and pull the control stick away until you eventually catch it, which works really well. And you have quick access to it by clicking the X button on GameCube, which is really convenient and way easier than having to open the Hypercube every single time. It only captures the small Twonkies though. The larger ones have to be devolved with the Sheenograph XL, which just plays audio of Sheen singing, and I guess it's like an anti-music or something, and that's accessible from the X button too. With the VDR by your side, you rid the house of the monsters and head out into Retroville, which they recreated perfectly. The houses and cars look so familiar, and while I have no idea what the layout of everything is supposed to be, it looks exactly how I'd expect it to. My biggest complaint with the game thus far is the lack of much actual gameplay. You just walk around and look for glowing items and now Twonkies to capture. It's a collectathon that doesn't offer many obstacles or challenges to overcome to collect things. It just spreads everything out and makes you trek every inch of the world. An example of doing a collectathon right would be Battle for Bikini Bottom, a game that came out just a year before this. In that game, your main objective was to collect golden spatulas, and while some were hidden, most required you to complete some sort of small challenge. This kept the player engaged and provided them with more interaction than just exploring the iconic world of Bikini Bottom. Here there's none of that. Once you catch one Twonkie, you know the drill and just have to go around and do it a bunch. There's no fun in exploring beyond the fact that it's the world of Jimmy Neutron you're exploring, but that's still a passable approach as long as the game provides an accurate representation of said world, which it does. Once that initial charm wears off though, the game becomes incredibly repetitive, but at this point in the game it's not like that, so hold that thought. After catching all the Twonkies and inventing the Lightning Absorber V2, it starts to rain, so Jimmy heads to the playground to harass Sydney about her little picnic being ruined when it's revealed to him that there's a giant Twonkie wreaking havoc in there. This leads to the first real boss fight, the playground boss, which is very annoying to beat. He goes around shocking stuff, sending tornadoes your way that send you flying, and occasionally does his arena sweeping electricity attack. All you gotta do is avoid everything, place these lightning absorbers on the seesaw, and launch them at him until he dies. This is much easier said than done. His attacks flood the stage and are a pain to avoid. It was the first time the game actually challenged me, which was refreshing but not a lot of fun. I knew exactly what to do and how to do it, but those damn tornadoes kept yeeting me away and dragging the thing out, and this was only made worse by how long it takes to drain his health, but I did eventually beat it and he just explodes, I guess. Then Jimmy heads to downtown Retroville to clean up the place, and this is probably my favorite area in the game. It's the most interesting to explore, there's tons of fun stuff to interact with, and you even invent the jetpack, which is awesome. You scale this building and avoid all the things the Twonkies are throwing at you. It's a lot of fun, and it was the first challenge in the game I rather enjoyed, but unfortunately, right after you do that, the jetpack breaks and you can't use it again. I get it would break later areas, but come on, why give me this super fun ability for one short section and never let me use it again? Despite that major letdown, being able to enter and explore the one and only candy bar was really freaking cool. Overall, Overall, this area was a blast to explore, and after the usual Twonky catching and item grabbing, Jimmy heads to the park, which might be a visually pleasing level, but don't let that fool you because the objectives within are terrible. You do the usuals, but then you get to this part where you have to herd llamas into a corral. That's literally it. You walk around this field and chase llamas into a cage. No inventions needed, nothing unique or fun about it, literally just that. One thing that really bothers me about this game is that some of the obstacles naturally have multiple solutions, and despite this, the game only accepts one. This level is the perfect example. Carl's stuck on a llama that's running around, and my initial thought was to shrink the llama, but nope. The shrink ray literally does not work after the first puzzle you solve with it. And there's tons of inventions like that. They're still accessible with your hypercube, you can still hold them and use them, but they do nothing. When making Jimmy Neutron into a video game, you have to A, recreate that world as accurately as possible, and B, provide the player with tons of inventions they can use to interact with said world. This game absolutely misses the mark in terms of inventions. There's so much potential for really fun to work through sections and awesome puzzles to solve that no Jimmy Neutron game has been able to capitalize on. It's a shame. That's what made the show so great, Jimmy being in some predicament and saving the day by inventing something and putting it to use. You invent tons of stuff in this game, but they're mostly one-time uses that are not taken advantage of. I think even Jet Fusion did this better. You invented quite a few things throughout the game, and almost all of them came in handy throughout. Inventions are only used in this game to solve a stupid simple puzzle or fight a boss, but after that one instance, they're never used again, ignoring the final boss. But back to the shitty llama herding, it doesn't take a super long time or anything, it just pissed me off that it was here to begin with. And this part where you take control of a lawnmower and have to find 5 Twonkies is really stupid too. You just ride around and hope to find them. What's with these Jimmy Neutron games and lawnmowers? After beating that, you move on to the next level having only found 3 of the 4 super invention pieces, and Nissa runs up to you screaming and says there's a giant monster that froze the lake. Then the next level starts, Jimmy makes this face, you find the key item right away, craft the next super invention called the energy puck launcher, and fight the frozen lake boss. You stand by these ramps and charge and shoot your pucks at him. That's it, but if you time them to hit him right after his taking damage animation, you can just keep hitting him and win no problem. I don't think this is supposed to work, but it did and I got to move on. The next level is Retroland, which is yet another iconic location from the show that's super cool to be able to explore. It looks just like you'd imagine, and it's really fun to work through. There's even some rides you can go on and a full-fledged arcade with playable minigames. The only problem is that you're required to play these games to move on. You see, you can't enter the Bat Outta Heck unless you have 50 tokens, and you obviously get tokens by playing games. These arcade games are fun, there's a Space Invaders ripoff, a Breakout clone, Great Value Frogger, and a ton more, but don't force me to play it. It's really cool to offer, but one thing I hate is when a game forces you to play some shoehorned in gameplay style to progress. I'm not against multiple playstyles, in fact I like them. They break up the pace of a game, and when they're using the same level, they can create some awesome puzzles. What I don't like is when there's this one-off thing that you're forced to do to move on. This shouldn't be mandatory, it's dumb, come on. And you only get a max of 10 tokens per game, which requires you to beat a high score. It isn't particularly hard to do, but it takes quite a bit of time. And when you have to do it for 5 games, it can take upwards of a half an hour, and in a 3-4 hour game, that's too much. This place sucks. When you finally do get 50 tokens, catch all the Twonkies, and invent the next super invention, the Photon Energy Pulse, you can enter the Bat Outta Heck. Jimmy goes for a ride, but to his dismay, a part of the track is missing, which sends him flying. He falls into what is essentially the den of yet another giant Twonky, the roller coaster boss, and this fight is the worst one yet. He shoots webs in these goop things, and you have to throw photon energy pulses on the ground by him to break holes in the ceiling that shine light down and damage him. His health takes forever to drain, just like the playground boss, and what makes it worse is that he can heal himself, which is a pain in the ass. I eventually cornered him with these light beams by accident, which made him take damage anytime he tried moving, and not long after, I won, and Ultra Lord was saved. Yeah, I forgot to mention he was down there. Jimmy doesn't bring him to safety though. After he makes a stupid remark, Jimmy just leaves him tied up down there. Again, no mercy. They then turn on a radio and hear the station is being overrun by Twonkies, so Jimmy heads there to catch them all. This is the final full level in the game, and it's an awful note to end on. It's not a location that's in the show to my knowledge, nor is it fun to explore at all. So many of the rooms look the same and make it very confusing to navigate, and that's only made worse by the increase in difficulty. As the game progresses, different colored Twonkies are introduced and they deal more damage and move faster, but none of them were a big enough issue to mention. This level, however, is filled with 2 of the most hard-hitting, the dark blue ones and the purple ones, and a lot of them are the fully grown dudes that throw shit at you, so good luck. Thankfully, checkpoints are pretty frequent, so it's not too bad, and there's no punishment at all for dying. In fact, after falling over, he stands back up and waits around to respawn. Why does it do this? It makes no sense, and while it isn't game-breaking or anything, it's sloppy, immersion-breaking, and shows that the devs didn't really care. But the most annoying thing about the level is that, to beat it, you have to go through this door that Sydney blocks off until you catch every Twonky. Okay, that's fine, but the problem is you can't catch all of them until you go through the door, and there's a Twonky count in the bottom right corner of the screen that told me I still had to find 6 more. So despite having the amount required to progress, I wandered around this already confusing level hoping to find a room I missed, and by mistake mistake. I went to enter the room Sydney wasn't letting me in, and apparently I had enough. Why even have the count if the number there contradicts the number of Twonkies Sydney's referring to? In other levels they make sense, but here the count should refer to the amount you're able to find in the accessible part of the level. Don't say find them all if it's literally impossible to. I'm lucky enough to have tried that door within a few minutes, but if you didn't and came to the logical conclusion that you still needed to find 6, you'd be stuck searching indefinitely. Needless to say, that's not a great level to end the game with, but the boss that follows it is a pretty solid final boss. Jimmy, Carl, and Sheen go to a Greystar rehearsal at some ice rink, and Jimmy says the Twonkus 3 comes into orbit in about an hour, leaving him some time to enjoy their music before he heads out. But this rock, this absolute dumbass, brings his backpack filled with Twonkies to the event, and after the music starts, they obviously get angry like they have in the entire game and grow into a massive creature that you have to defeat. And as stupid as the setup might be, the fight itself isn't that bad. The boss has 3 forms, and each is pretty much the same as a previous fight. In his first form, he punches the ground and can freeze you, but if you shoot your energy pucks at the right time and dodge his attack, his shield is lowered and you can send one at him for a little damage. He does that for a little while, then turns into the playground boss and sends electricity and tornadoes at you, and using the lightning absorber works just as it did before. After a minute of that, he transforms into the roller coaster boss, which is almost identical to the previous fight, only difference is he vomits at you sometimes instead of shooting webs. It cycles through these 3 until you eventually drain all of his health, and just like all the fights before it, his health drains incredibly slowly. It took me like 15 minutes to beat. While it lasts way too long for what it is, it's a really solid final boss, and it actually puts to use the super inventions from earlier in the game, which I like. After you beat him, everyone's like, great job, Jimmy, but he can't help but feel like he forgot about something, at which point it cuts to Sheen's room and reveals to the player that he didn't capture one little Twonkie. Then it does the old the end ... question mark thing, and the game ends. Thank God. I really want to like this game. After 2 bad Jimmy Neutron games, the guy deserves at least 1 solid title, but unfortunately, he didn't get that. This game's not awful, it's just far from good. I would label it as the best of the trilogy, but I can't come to that conclusion until I try one last thing in Jet Fusion. If you recall, I encountered a glitch where it wouldn't trigger the cutscene at the end of the communication stations level, despite me finding all the key items. Recently, I read a comment on that video that said there was a Goddard upgrade chip hidden in that level that I might have missed. I triple-checked that I collected every item, but I can't recall if I collected that Goddard upgrade chip. It's been a long time, so I'm putting in Jet Fusion one last time to see if that was the issue. The only reason I played past the Volcano of Doom was to beat it and put it behind me to never play again, but it won't even allow me the satisfaction of that. Here we go. So I took a trip back to the infamous communication stations, got the gist of how to play again, and made it to the section in question, the part with the super tedious laser maze. After some in-depth searching, I did indeed find a Goddard upgrade, and after working through the level, which was no walk in the park, it took me like 40 minutes, but getting to the end did trigger the cutscene. Yeah, there was no glitch, just a horrible miscommunication on the game's part, but it's not structurally broken. But that doesn't excuse the issue at hand. The game didn't indicate to me in the slightest that I was missing a Goddard upgrade. Jimmy said he didn't think he had everything he needed, but after finding all the invention pieces and going through the level multiple times, I was led to believe the game was broken. There's actually a term for when this happens. It's called a guide dang it, which is defined as any instance in a video game where the game fails to provide sufficient information to a player that could aid them in solving a task, in this case, beating the level. I missed something that was quite hard to find, and the game didn't inform me of what I was missing, nor did it lead me in any way to figure it out on my own, which is a textbook example of this. While these do not break a game, they are a major problem and should therefore lower the quality of said game substantially. I also want to thank Sir Noel for pointing that out to me. I did a ton of research before throwing the towel because I really didn't want to quit after all I put up with, and I couldn't find anything about what to do, so without you I wouldn't have been able to beat this trilogy, so thanks. I also want to invite all of you to drop comments when I miss something. I'm not perfect, I do a lot of research, but there's still some things that I miss, and I really appreciate when you guys let me know. Start discussions, inform me, be an active part of the channel, it really means a lot to me. But enough beating around the bush, let's finally put this game to rest. When you reach the end of the level with the Goddard upgrade, Jimmy hops on Jetboard Goddard and heads down the canyon to reach an abandoned rocket. You hold A to speed up, X to brake, and move left and right to move that direction. Simple, but movement in this thing is way too slippery and imprecise, and the design of the slope requires extreme precision. There's 5 items you have to collect before you reach the bottom, which isn't bad, but each one is held by a robot you have to chase after and bump into 3 times in order to obtain it. Hitting these dudes once is hard enough, but 3 times? I didn't even know they were holding items. I actively avoided them my first time down, and after it told me I couldn't progress, I went down again, bumped into one by mistake, and saw it took damage, so I kept doing it. It gives you a tutorial of how to ride, which is very straightforward, but not how to get the items, which isn't the most obvious thing. It's just one lack of proper instruction to another with this game, eh? This part took a decent amount of time, but it wasn't awful, and right after that, Jimmy takes off into space and heads to Calamitous' lair. but you need 50 nav chips to access it, and I only had 41, so I was going to need to backtrack and collect another 9. Doesn't sound like much until you consider the fact that there's only 60 in the entire game, and these are very spread out in levels, so collecting 9 more is no easy task. Luckily, we have YouTube guides. I can't even imagine doing this without them, but it's still a long and tedious process. But I knew there was no turning back at this point. It was time to finish what I started over a year ago and complete this game, so I did all the grinding, and I'm glad I did. Now, it took me over an hour, and if I had just played through everything, it would have been intolerable, but having not played in a year, I didn't mind revisiting everything and refreshing my memory. Since you don't have to collect any of the key items, you can skip a lot of the crap. Screw this dark section, the jet ski racing, the fishing minigame, and the sumo wrestling. You just work your way to some nav chip locations and exit as soon as you collect them. And when you play the game like this, it's actually fun. There's a good amount of challenge in it, and that comes from tough to work through sections, which Attack of the Twonkies is very much lacking in, but that's a topic for later. I had fun collecting the remainder of nav chips, and once you do, you head to Calamitous' lair and take on the final boss, which is a really solid finale to the game. When Jimmy arrives on the space station, Calamitous uses the 3 idols to power this giant robot he calls his Calamabot, and to fight it, Jimmy makes his own robot, cleverly named the Jimmy Bot, but first he has to turn the machine on. This leads to the first phase, which has you using all your different weapons to solve simple puzzles while occasionally avoiding attacks from the Calamabot. I like this a lot. It utilizes the abilities you've had throughout the game and applies it to a boss scenario, which is exactly what a final boss should do. After that, the Jimmy Bot is made, but you can't get into it until you turn off the machine, so you trick the Calamabot into freeing the idols, collect them, and get in your robot, which leads to the second and final phase of the fight, which I don't like a whole lot. This is yet another unpolished gameplay style the devs threw together and make you use to progress, but here it makes sense for the character and is a pretty epic final battle, so I don't mind. You hold A to run, press B to shoot gum, and X to reach out and grab. It's a basic moveset and it works just fine. All you have to do is clog these gears up, avoid the Calamabot's attacks, and shoot gum at him until he can no longer move and falls over, which does take a while, but each time you do, one of its arms falls off. Once both are gone, he starts flying around and spitting bombs everywhere, and after a little bit, he lands, allowing you to grab and throw him into the wall, ending the fight. It's a lot more difficult than I'm making it sound, but that's what it boils down to. After landing the fatal blow, this cutscene plays, and it looks really nice. Calamitous tries to escape, but Jet rams him, gets a hold of his teleporter, and sends him to prison. Nice. As he's disappearing, he self-destructs the station, so Jimmy, Jet, and Goddard hop into their rocket and escape just in the nick of time. When they get back to Earth, Jimmy connects the idols to his virtual world reproduction machine and changes Retrovolt back to normal. The end. I beat it. I officially completed Jimmy Neutron Jet Fusion, and having done so, I have to admit something. I was wrong about this game. This is not the worst thing I have ever played, and having revisited Attack of the Twonkies, I have to say, this might be the best Jimmy Neutron game of the trilogy. Never thought those words would leave my mouth, but it's true. I think we can all agree that Boy Genius is the worst of the bunch. It's got absolutely nothing going for it, and it was a bad experience from start to finish. Jet Fusion has tons of truly awful sections sprinkled about, but the better moments in the game definitely redeem them and are the best the trilogy has to offer. For every dark section where you can't see what's going on, there's a really fun platforming and puzzle-solving chunk of the level that's not far away. The guy Dang and I encountered in my first go at the game is an inexcusable offense, and just one instance of this in the game lowers its overall quality substantially. And the minimum requirements in the game halting you constantly don't do much to help with this, but I will say, these things only really affect you on your first playthrough. If I'm ever to revisit this game, I'll know to grab that Goddard upgrade, and I'll remember some of those nav drip locations and make sure to grab them. The fun in this game comes from challenging sections that require you to skillfully jump, swing, and utilize all your different gadgets. These moments are awesome and are just as fun on a second playthrough, with the added benefit of being able to avoid some headaches. Attack of the Twonkies is its antithesis. It's a consistently mundane experience throughout. There aren't any lows nearly as low, but there's no highs, and a second playthrough would be even worse. The magic of exploring the world of Jimmy Neutron wears off about halfway through the downtown stage, and once it's gone, it's gone. The rest of the game from that point on was an absolute chore that I won't go back and play ever again. Twonky catching is so damn repetitive, and once you've seen the world, you've seen it. There's no reason to go back when the gameplay blows. So in terms of replayability, Jet Fusion wins by a landslide, but on a first playthrough, I'd say the games are relatively even. Do I recommend you play any of these? No. But if I had to pick one, I'd say Jet Fusion, though you probably won't have a very good time with it. It's weird, Jimmy Neutron was such a great show, but it only ran from 2002 to 2006, and despite this, it got 3 games for the GameCube and PS2, and none of them are good. It's such a shame. The series really deserves at least one quality title to call its own, but at this point, I'm just happy to put these games behind me and move on to some better stuff. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, please drop a like and check out the other Nickelodeon videos I've made. If you want to stay up to date with the cool stuff I'm producing, please subscribe. It helps me out a ton and keeps the videos coming, so win-win. Okay, I'm gonna go play something good. See ya. This one's had it coming for a while. 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 Yeah. There are pieces of disc all over my room. Oh no, no, Boy Genius, no! And as a wise man once said, this game blows!